Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coco and Daltz. We're real people bringing you real reviews of all the latest movies and TV shows that are streaming on Amazon Prime, Netflix, and Disney+. This is episode 76.
What?
I know. We've lasted over 3/4 of a century in podcast
that
episodes.
Can't be right.
Yeah.
We've been around the same number as your birth year.
Yeah, right.
Right?
No. I'm 21. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm also not Daltz.
And I'm not Coco.
And today on the episode, whichever number it may be,
Right,
we are reviewing the brand spanking new Netflix limited docuseries, Fear City, New York versus the Mafia. Daltz, what's it all about?
I wonder if they did that on purpose when they did Fear City as like ferocity.
Oh,
Do you think that was a thing?
I didn't even think about that.
They considered that?
Yeah, you're so smart.
So, Fear City, New York City versus the mob. That's what you said, right?
Yeah.
It's a 3-episode docuseries. It features the trials and tribulations of New York City facing the mob in the 70s and 80s. And it's essentially how they took down 5 crime families. 5 families ran the city in a lot of ways in those days, apparently, according to this documentary. And it was the FBI and some element of the New York police that got together and essentially tried to figure out a way to bring these crime families down. So these crime families were running everything in the city. They were running the construction industry. They were running garbage disposal.
The docks,
the garment industry. So everything, some of the hospitals they owned, apparently. So they were running the entire city. And the city in the 70s and 80s and part of the 90s, too, New York City, that is, was a bit of a cesspool and was a hard place to live in and not a very hard place to die in, from what they're saying. And there was a lot of crime, a lot of ne'er-do-wells roaming the streets. I think it's probably a lot like Escape from New York, from what the description, the sound of it. The Kurt Russell movie that
was shot in St. Louis, actually.
Right. And so it's a docuseries, 3-parter, like I said, 44 to 62 minutes long are the episodes. It's an easy binge. We binged it earlier this very same day. It came out July 22nd, and it's trending right now at number 2 on Netflix as we record this podcast. So that's the summary. It's a very brief summary, and I'm not as good at the summaries as Coco is.
You said you wanted to do the summaries.
No,
so that's
I did.
why you did it.
I do, because you know why? Because I wanted your tones at the beginning of the podcast to woo people in. I wanted you to do the intro, because if they're always hearing me, they're being like, is this guy on the podcast still? I thought maybe Coco would have gone solo by now.
I'm like the sirens, and you're like,
right.
Who is it? Not Odysseus.
I'm like the nails on the chalkboard?
No, that's not what I meant.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So, Coco, what did you think of this docu-series on Netflix?
Well, once again, I have to say that once again, we watched something that I wanted to watch. Poor Daltz never gets to watch anything he wants to watch. He's like, hey, could we watch Blade Runner 2049? And I'm like, Babysitter's Club! So poor Daltz never gets to watch anything he wants to watch.
That's very true. That's very true.
Yeah, so thank you, Daltz, for...
Not true.
Thank you, Daltz, for watching a Mafia miniseries. Your favorite thing in the world is mob stuff.
Body count.
Yeah, it had a very high body count.
Real body count, which is even worse.
And they were not shy about showing crime scene photos. There was one head of the 5 families who got whacked, and we got to see those crime scene photos repeatedly. And it was pretty gruesome, although I did actually think it was a little bit funny that he's lying there on the ground post-whackage with the cigar still hanging out of his mouth.
Still had the cigar in his mouth.
I was like, wow, I didn't know that was something that could happen. I don't know. So.
Yeah, and apparently like 85 rounds of bullets were shot into him, and he still kept on to his cigar. So who knew?
So it was pretty gruesome, but I actually I enjoyed this. Mm-hmm. I thought they did a really good job of telling the story of how the FBI went about building the case against the mob, because previously, so this case that brought down the heads of the 5 families in around 85, 86 was a RICO case, which I forget what RICO stands for, but if you've watched Law & Order, you've heard RICO referred to.
Racketeering is the first one.
Yeah, you've heard RICO referred to many times. Like previously, they'd only been able to go for the low-level guys, like the guys out on the street, like pushing drugs or, somebody beat somebody else up or whatever. So they'd only previously been able to go for the low level guys, but with this they were able to get the heads of all the 5 families. And I thought how they explained how they built the case and how RICO wasn't even a thing until like the early 70s. And then the guy at Cornell, the law professor at Cornell who wrote the RICO statute, said, okay, RICO is Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. So there we go. And then the guy at Cornell Law School who wrote RICO said, why aren't you guys using RICO to go after like the 5 bosses instead of going after like, adults out on the corner, like, popping somebody,
You say that I would only be a soldier? I wouldn't be the head of the family? I'm the head of this family.
You are. Well,
that's a different kind of, usually I'm getting abuse more than.
I think the dog was the head of this family when she was still alive.
Very true.
You were the underboss.
I was the underboss
to the real Coco.
To the real Coco.
Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. It was very painstaking, like how
it was deliberate.
Yeah, like how they had to tap it, and it was really cool too, showing how they went about tapping cars and TV sets,
planting bugs.
Yeah, planting bugs, and then they had to listen to just hours upon hours upon hours of tape and rewinding it and trying to get the transcripts right and having to distinguish, am I listening to this voice or like this voice in the restaurant? And the last episode was where they really focused on the lawyers and the court case, and like everything came together, and that was when they took the guys to court. And I thought they did a really good job of building suspense in that episode. So
yeah, and they had a lot of the characters who were they had at least 2 of the members of the mob who had testified and turned state's evidence, who were featured and interviewed. So they had both sides of the story. They had the cops and they had the robbers, essentially. And it was provided, I thought it provided a lot of really good nitty-gritty details, like you said, Coco. But this is a very challenging topic to make interesting if it's a docuseries. Like if it's a dramatic presentation, if you're looking at The Irishman or something like that, it's easy to drop a scene where the bad guy comes in and mows everybody down. It's very dramatic. You didn't do there weren't a lot of dramatizations in this. It was a lot of real photos. There's a lot of mundane stuff here. So you can imagine how many, like you said, just sitting listening to those tapes. And this is reel-to-reel tapes, people. So like you're listening to something, and then the point that hit hard to me was every time you'd listen to something and then you'd rewind it, but the rewind was a lot longer than you thought it was going to be for that amount of dialogue.
It took like 20 seconds, to go back to hear the guy be like, just whack him again, or
yeah,
something
right.
like
yeah,
that.
And you had to
like,
rewind and rewind. It was sort of the equivalent to me as like when you're seeing a French movie and then you see the translation underneath. It's like, surely he said more than that.
Right.
Like so it was the equivalent. It seemed jarring, but it's very challenging to make some sort of docuseries like this interesting in that way, because you're talking about real mundane stuff. You're about people sitting in cars for hours waiting for somebody to show up, and then taking pictures of those people, and then not doing it, not confronting them or anything like that. And then the transcriptions of the audio calls and everything like that. The most interesting stuff to me was, like you said, was getting into the houses and bugging the phones and bugging the TVs and how that happened. And that was very dramatic, and that was sort of tense in certain ways. But I think that they did a really good job. I will say that of these kinds of shows, especially on Netflix lately, things are too long. And I thought that this one was not too long. I think that they could have done some more in terms of what happened next. So we get a resolution at the end of this in terms of the crime family gets cleaned out, and there's a hit or two that takes care of some business as well, of some crime family heads. But I thought that there was a lot more like, here's what happened in New York after that kind of thing. And we didn't really get that. We kind of got a really quick shovelful of, and everything was great.
Yeah, and there were only maybe 3 people who we got a flash at the end, like Rudy Giuliani was mayor of New York City from 1993 to 2001 or something like that. Like, I was like, well, what about John Gotti? Like, John Gotti figured in this thing, and like we all know he rose to prominence after that, but like, why don't you talk about Gotti? Why don't you talk about Michael Chertoff, who became like the Secretary of Homeland Security?
Right.
Like, why don't we have more of that? So yeah, I was with you. I thought there would be more of, and then Valerie Smith spent the next 20 years at the FBI and, the Hoover Building, doing blah, 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 and now she's retired.
And caught the Unabomber or whatever it happens to be.
Right, exactly.
Like there was a lot of, I think my skeptical person, part of the side of me will say, well, they're setting up for more of these now. They're going to be like Fear City.
Vegas,
yeah, exactly. Like everything is Fear City. So maybe they will go into more Fear City. Rudy Giuliani cleans up New York or something like that, and that'll be the next one. I think there was some times when they could have nipped and tucked a little bit, but really I don't. That's kind of nitpicking in terms of the length of each one of these. And I thought three parts, man. I mean, like that's a piece of cake. We've watched 18 hours of Iceland detective documentary or dramatization. So
we watched 30 hours of Finnish noir in like 10 days. So we can
3 hours. That's a piece of cake.
Yeah, totally.
I wanted more. I was like, let's watch something else.
Yeah.
What else you got? Netflix?
Yeah. So wow. So you actually didn't seem to hate it.
I didn't hate it entirely. It was a pretty gruesome movie, or a pretty gruesome presentation, I should say. But you have to do these kinds of things. It's sort of like having a Mafia movie and not having any F words in it. Like
right.
you just gotta play it the way it is in real life, and you gotta be accurate, and that's part of the accuracy. I think they did linger a little bit too much over some of those crime scene photos for effect, maybe sensationalism, but that's again nitpicking. I thought it was well done. I think it's worth it's a good, if you're into documentaries, you're into crime, you're into New York City, I think this is a home run for you. I mean, if you're just a casual, what am I going to watch on a Sunday before I go back to the grind on Monday? This is probably not it. And it's not it if you're like downcast by society right now. I mean, it's not an uplifting kind of movie, but I think generally it's a pretty good change of pace. What do you think, Coco?
Yeah, definitely. If you're a fan of the true crime genre, like I mentioned a few episodes back when we were talking about unsolved mysteries, I think this is also a good watch. I did enjoy, like I said, they did a very good job of explaining a lot of stuff. They did a good job of explaining how the mob, like Dalt said, had its fingers in so many different pies, the garment industry and the docks and sanitation and so much stuff. And I'm one of those people, like the guys in Office Space. I would be looking up money laundering in the dictionary because I just don't get how that could work. So I thought they did a really good job of explaining for non-criminal or non-law enforcement people. Like, this is how, even though it's an $8 million job, like one firm bids for 10 and then everybody else agrees to bid above that. So the firm with the $10 million bid gets that, even though it's only an $8 million job. So now you've got $2 million to spread the wealth around, so
the collusion was something that was very interesting.
Yeah, so I thought they did a really good job of that, and it was very interesting to hear a lot of the takes and everything from the people who were in it, like the guy who actually went into the houses with the mobsters and had like Joey Bag of Donuts holding the flashlight for him so he could install the bug in the TV. Like that I'm like, oh my God, I would have been crapping myself in fear.
That took some stones right there.
Yeah, totally.
It's like I was saying to you when we were watching this, I bet you had a bet down with the guys at the bureau. He said, I'm going to get Joey Bag of Donuts to help me with this bug operation. Yeah, watch this. Totally. And then he'll go back to the office. Or maybe he actually didn't do it. Like that's the thing in those days too, is there was no way there were no cell phone cameras and there were no home security cameras, and there's no internet, obviously, none of that stuff. So there's no way to verify. So this was really leading edge technology. They're talking about planting bugs. That's why the Mafia guys were all like telling all their secrets in the car and stuff like that, because they had no idea that there would be bugs, because bugs weren't really a thing in those days.
Yeah, totally. Although I did like that guy. He was like, if things go south, I'm going to get out of here in a hurry. And I'm like, you're going to be dead if things go south, okay? Like, what are you talking about? You think you're just going to run, like, screaming out of the house and the guy's just going to watch you? I'm like, no, you're gonna be popped, like, right in that guy's living room, trying to stick the bug in his gigantic wooden television set with the panels on the side,
Playing Tom Brokaw on the NBC Nightly News.
Right. CNN, brand new channel.
Yeah. What is this, news all the time? It'll never work.
It was, I really enjoyed seeing like the footage from the 70s and 80s. Like, it was really great for nostalgia.
Yeah.
Like the CNN footage and all the old like MTV footage or whatever.
Right. And the old New York news stations that they were playing, the news shows at 6 o'clock. And this just in, Gambino family man charged. It was pretty cool to see all that 80s hair piling up on top of everybody's head. And
like even the local commercials in New York, because they have cheesy, low budget local commercials too. So the guy like, come and get your mattress, grand opening. Like that was really good.
Cheap electronics at Times Square, come and get them right now.
Totally.
The guy with the big, huge fake Empire Empire State Building thing that he was throwing around there.
Totally.
Like that's what I love about these kinds of things that are really well done, and I don't think people realize how hard it is to get that kind of B-roll footage and to get it to make it authentic. And that was another thing that I really enjoyed about this, is that they had a lot of aerial shots of the city from those days. I don't know if it was exactly 70s and 80s, but it was probably pretty close. And you can see Brooklyn and the Bronx with vacant strips and vacant lots and stuff like that, things that don't even exist now. It's hard to imagine that the city was bombed out and burned out in a lot of ways in those days. But the fact that they had this helicopter footage of the city, and you got a really good sense of what it was like in those days. And I like that kind of thing. Rather than recreating it, if they can find this archival footage, and if you're going to find any archival footage, you're going to find it of New York. I mean, it's the media capital of the world. Even back in those days, there were still millions of people who lived there, so they still had a pretty robust media community. So I think that's another thing that adds to the legitimacy of a doc like this, is that you have the footage that backs it up, and you have the actual, even though they're doing a recreation of how we put the bug on the TV, they have actual commercials or whatever on the TV itself.
Yeah. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. It was, like you said, not too long. Maybe I could have gone for another episode of it, but you know, it was. I enjoyed it. I thought they did a really good job of building suspense. They did a good job of explaining things. They left me wanting more. So
which is good.
Yeah,
which is rare in these days. Usually, you get to the end of one of these, and like, yeah, okay, let's move on.
Madeleine McCann. No, that should have been 5 episodes, not 8. You know, and instead we're like, no, it could have been 4 instead of 3.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What about you?
Yeah, I would say.
Give it a cigar up.
What?
A cigar,
1.5 cigars.
Mouth, like,
yeah. I was trying to think of a tactful way of 2 shell casings.
Right.
But yeah, I would recommend it. I think it's a decent watch for most people.
2 Giuliani rugs up.
2 Radio City Music Hall kicks up.
Yeah, there we go. That's our standard New York one.
Right,
so.
Exactly. Macy's Parade balloons.
Ooh.
Way up.
There you go.
Floating away. So, do you want to walk us out of here with where people can find us?
Yes, we actually have a special announcement. I should have said this right at the top. We are now on iHeartRadio.
Oh.
You can find our podcast.
When did that happen?
That just happened this week. So you can find our podcast on iHeartRadio.com. Just search for Coco and Daltz. If you have the app, check for us on that. We are coming to you on a brand new platform. We're very excited about that.
Yes.
You can also find us on all of our old platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, TuneIn, Google Play, and YouTube. You can find us on the interwebs at cocoanddaltz.com. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at cocoanddaltz, or you can email us at cocoanddaltz@gmail.com. Drop us a line. Let us know what you want to hear us review in the future, what you want to think about episodes we've done in the past. Just say hi. Maybe we'll give a shout out if you get in touch.
Rate and share us, please.
Yes, please. Rate and review us, but only if you have something good to say.
And you know where you can also find us, Coco?
In our hearts. I don't know where.
Sitting on the couch watching something.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
That's usually where we are.
That's actually kind of where most people are these days, because if
you're smart,
we're still in lockdown, people. Well, depending on which part of the country you're in. I don't know. If you're in Florida, maybe you're out like doing keg stands or something.
Right. We're in the Northeast here, so we're paying attention.
we're
following the rules.
We're the Puritans up here, like, you should be in your home, you know? And everybody else is out, you know,
standing at the front window waving at people without masks on. We have perfectly fine right not to have a mask on when they're riding their bike, but you're like, hey, you, what are you doing?
You're too close. Do you know that person? Why are you next to each other?
Are you related? You're going to kill me. Okay.
So on that note.
So anyway, enough of that. So for another episode of the podcast, thank you very much for joining us, listener. We know you have a choice, and we appreciate you choosing us. I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Daltz.